Welcome to Lindamood-Bell Radio. I'm Dave Hungerford. Lindamood-Bell helps schools address the urgent need for learning loss recovery. Our professional development prepares educators to meet the needs of at-risk learners, including low-income students and students identified for special education. Our evidence-based interventions help schools make a difference for students. Go to lindamoodbell.com to learn more and get started. Today's episode is a discussion about trends in 2023 that I had with Dr. Robert Pasternack. Today, I'm with the Honorable Dr. Robert Pasternack, former Assistant Secretary for the Office of Special Education and Rehabilitative Services. And Dr. Pasternack, welcome. See you again.
Thanks, Dave, and thanks to Lindamood-Bell for the invitation to do this podcast.
Well, with 2022 coming to an end, it's always fun to think about what might be around the corner for many things, including education. And this year was different. We're coming out of almost a suspension of time, a suspension of education for many. And I know you've played a lot of roles in your professional career, from teacher, administrator, with the Department of Education. I'm sure you've seen the ebb and flow of a lot of things and a lot of changes. I wanted to get your feeling on talking about, first of all, students. And we've heard so much about learning loss. Are there any changes on the horizon for that?
So thanks for that important question, Dave. As you know, and folks listening know, what happened during the pandemic, or as a result of the pandemic, was a move to virtual use of technology to educate our kids, or to attempt to educate our kids. And prior to the pandemic, in Tennessee, which has probably one of the more, if not the most robust data systems in the country, prior to the pandemic, the lowest performing school district in the entire state of Tennessee was the virtual school that was operated by K-12, which is a private provider in Tennessee. In Pennsylvania, the lowest performing school district in the entire state was the virtual school operated, in that case, by the state Department of Education. And the reason I mention that is that those data are very troubling in terms of virtual schooling not having a great track record in terms of outcomes and results for kids. And that was prior to the pandemic. And the reason I bring that up is because, as you mentioned, and is being documented, we're not really sure how significant the learning loss was. We know there was a significant learning loss because kids were not in school. Kids were trying to get educated using technology. And many kids, particularly kids from low socioeconomic status homes, don't have access to technology, don't have broadband, don't have computers in their homes. That exacerbated the learning loss for those particular students. We know that kids with disabilities who have short attention spans were really having a hard time being able to sit for 6 hours a day in front of their screen and do their schoolwork via the use of technology. Parents are not really trained to be teachers, and they were put in the role of having to go ahead and try to educate their kids or help educate their kids. All of those factors combined are just some of the factors as to why we have seen this learning loss. What seems to be documented is that kids lost more in math than in reading. But the estimates are that they've lost as much as a half a year, if not even more. And to bifurcate education in terms of saying that math doesn't involve reading is absurd, because, as you know, and as folks know, the way that math skills are measured involve the use of word problems. So if students can't read and can't comprehend what they're reading, they're going to have great difficulty being able to do the math work that's being asked of them. So we have seen, as I said earlier, the word unprecedented gets used a lot in current days, but really the learning loss is something that is unprecedented. And how we're going to respond to that as a country is going to be interesting as we move into 2023. We're really looking at things like high-dose tutoring as a strategy to try to help kids recoup the learning loss that they have experienced. We have to document the learning loss to see how significant it is and how it really has impacted students, particularly students with disabilities, English language learners, those kids in high poverty. Prior to the pandemic, we know that 25 million students in the U.S. Can't read proficiently, and 65% of fourth graders don't read at a proficient level. So those kinds of data were documented prior to the pandemic, and the pandemic has just exacerbated those kinds of problems. And as you asked, I think we really don't know how significant the learning loss has been. We just know that there has been a significant amount of learning loss, and it's a deleterious effect on academic skills and social skills. And mental health is something that I hope we'll have a chance to talk about, because we know that we've really seen mental health challenges faced by kids in numbers that we have never seen before in the history of the country. Talking about 40% of students who are being interviewed talking about being depressed or having suicidal ideation, and mental health needs of students have only increased as a result of the pandemic. So not only have we seen a loss in academic skills, to your question about learning loss, but we've also seen and really haven't dealt with as much the significant loss in social skills, in emotional skills.
What do you think this role of skill, if I can just interrupt for a second, what do you foresee as the role of schools in mitigating that mental health challenge, the challenges there?
Prior to the pandemic, the National Association of School Psychologists documented that only 25% of students who need mental health services were receiving those mental health services in schools. Since the pandemic, the National Association of School Psychologists has changed those data, and they say that now 20% of students who need mental health services are getting those mental health services in schools. So schools have a critically important role to play in delivering mental health services to students. Let's talk about special ed for a second. We know that students with behavior disorders and emotional disturbance have significant mental health needs, and those needs are not being met, and they're often documented in their IEPs. Related services are supposed to be provided in terms of either psychological services or school social work services, and students were not getting those services. So as we look at how we're going to help students recoup the skills that they've lost, we've got to be able to use schools to deliver mental health services. I have, for many years, been lamenting the fact that school psychologists waste too much of their precious time giving meaningless IQ tests instead of really being able to spend time meeting the mental health needs of kids and working with the educational community to meet the mental health needs of kids. And to your question more succinctly, we've seen a deterioration in funding of community-based mental health services. So the onus is really on schools who have the personnel, although there are shortages of personnel, as we'll probably talk about. But we know that schools are in a position, they have the students there. So they have the population of students with the need, and they have the ability to go ahead and help meet the need. But that historically has not been happening, and the pandemic has only made things worse. And I really worry about the mental health of our kids, and hope that as a school system and a system of schools, then a learning community, that we can really step up and do a better job of helping meet the mental health needs of kids.
I want to go back to something you touched on a second ago about online learning. Honestly, at Lindamood-Bell, we had a pretty good experience. We are provided live, and it's one-to-one, so it's very smaller than the big scale of across the country we're looking at, and it's private tutoring, obviously. But our gains were statistically significant and similar to the ones that we see in our center. I feel kind of that online instruction, that this, even for the masses here, this was kind of version 1.0, and that inevitably it's going to come back and be a bigger part of the educational process. Would you agree with that, or do you disagree?
One of the things that has impressed me about you guys and women at Lindamood-Bell is not only do you pay attention to how kids learn and provide incredibly important services, but you're always looking and monitoring the efficacy of what you do. Your awareness and knowledge about how to use technology is something that preceded the pandemic. One of the problems that we saw across the country is that teachers were not trained in how to use technology. We're not trained in how to deliver instruction using technology. So that contributed to the fact that they really weren't effective in being able to deliver instruction via the technology. And a lot of schools didn't have the broadband, didn't have the technology, didn't have the infrastructure set up prior to the pandemic to be able to allow them to deliver the kinds of effective instruction that you folks were able to deliver because of your history, because of your passion for doing the right thing, and always making sure that the services that you all provide are effective. So I'm not surprised by what you just shared, and it certainly, excuse me, it certainly supports the history of efficacy that Lindamood-Bell has been very proud to demonstrate over the years.
I guess that makes a good point. I mean, case in point that you and I, when we started this podcast 15 minutes ago, lost our Wi-Fi and had to start over again. So imagine in schools that are in, areas that maybe are very rural or underfunded, they'd have Wi-Fi issues as just a basis of it.
Exactly. And we also talk about the fact that in many homes, if you have one computer and you have several kids who need access to that computer, and they're of different ages and different grades, how do you navigate that? How do parents navigate that? Where do they, in small apartments that many families live in across the country, how do they find the space to be able to give kids a quiet environment in order to be able to use the technology to get the instruction that's trying to be delivered virtually? So there are just so many problems that kids were facing and families were facing, and all of those things, I think, just sort of contributed to the learning loss that you asked about earlier, and are going to be problems going forward. I mean, I think there are some school districts. I live in Virginia Beach, and I know that the Virginia Beach schools have worked very hard to provide a computer to every student who attends the Virginia Beach schools. But not every school district across the country is in the financial shape to be able to do that. So there are, anyway, those are just some of the contributing factors to why kids have struggled to be able to get access to instruction when it's even delivered virtually, and if it's done well enough to be accessed.
And I know something that you sort of touched on that has been a concern and interest of yours for a long time is we're hearing all across the country about the fact that they can't retain or hire teachers at the level that they need for the population. How are schools going to, and by schools I mean how are teacher training programs, and how are things going to evolve to solve that challenge?
We have always had a shortage of teachers in special education and in math and in science. Those shortages have only gotten worse as a result of the pandemic. We have seen increased stress on teachers because of the increasing use of politics in education, the banning of books, instruction to teachers that they can't talk about certain issues like sexuality or gender identity or trans. Exactly, the whole debate about this phenomenon of critical race theory and whether that even exists or not. We've just had in one state, I won't mention which state, their state board of education was just having a debate about their social studies standards. And in the social studies standards, they were talking about Indians, Native Americans, as being immigrants. And as an honorary member of the Navajo Nation, one of the many privileges that I've enjoyed in my life, I was particularly offended by that. I mean, to think about the fact that anybody would consider the indigenous people in this country immigrants. We're the immigrants, not anyway. They're just, and teachers see all of this, and they're just. That has contributed to their leaving the profession. They decide that the stress is of being a teacher. Teachers, I mean, I sucked when I taught, and I've said that before. I did two things remarkably well. I called the roll beautifully, and I did a good bang-up job of taking the kids out to recess. But when it came time to teach struggling kids how to read, I sucked. And the reason I sucked was because I wasn't trained very well on how to teach struggling kids how to read. And sadly, Dave, that continues to be an issue. Teacher preparation program, one of the many privileges I enjoy is I'm on the board of the National Center on Teacher Quality. We look at the quality of teacher preparation across the country every year, survey 750 colleges and universities, and teachers don't get the training that they need on how to teach reading. And you folks at Lindamood-Bell know this better than most because you really pride yourselves, as you should, on training your folks how to teach struggling kids how to read, and have the data to show that your approach is incredibly effective and successful. So the shortages that we have seen across the country are only growing worse. And the fear is, where are we going to find people to step in and do this critically important work? There are states like Florida that are reducing the requirements for teachers, because basically they will take anyone to show up. There are states that are lowering the standards for substitute teachers so that anybody can go in and be a substitute teacher, because we need substitute teachers, because the pandemic has not only adversely affected the health of kids, but it's adversely affected the health of adults. And we've got many adults who are struggling and they're out of the classroom. And so we need people to be available to go in and teach these kids. So all of those factors are just combining to exacerbate the shortage. We've seen a shortage of speech and language pathologists. We've seen a shortage of school psychologists. So these are critically important folks for the population of students that I have been particularly involved with, the 7 million students with disabilities who are on IEPs. And then there is the issue of pay. We have not paid teachers what they are worth over the years. And now people who, instead of going into education, can see other career paths that are going to be more financially rewarding. And so they're leaving the classroom and going in to other professions. So that's yet another reason why we see this shortage growing. And I'm really worried about, where are we going to find people? I know the focus of our podcast is to talk about next year. What are we going to do for next year? And years after that? One of the school psychology programs in the state that I live in has closed down. And there are teacher training programs across the country that are saying that they are not seeing the numbers of students matriculating into their programs that they have historically seen. So not only do we have an attrition, an exodus issue, we have an issue of folks not wanting to get into education because of some of the reasons that I tried to articulate earlier.
So do you see a move more towards privatization of the model for education? Is that the light at the end of the tunnel?
Well, the charters are an effort to address that issue, and the charters have a spotty track record in terms of success. There have been some financial problems with some charters. There have been some scandals involving charters. The data across the country are that charters serve fewer students with disabilities than the traditional public schools. There are programs like the McKay Scholarship Program in Florida, where parents can say that they are disappointed or dissatisfied with the services that their students are receiving in public schools, and they want to move their kid to a private or a parochial school, a non-public school, and money for that student's education goes with the student to the private school. And then the parents find out that in the private schools, they have given up their rights under IDEA. And not only that, but the related services that the schools were providing are not available in the private or parochial school. So they then take the kid out of the private or parochial school and move the kid back to the public school. But the money that went initially with the student stays with the private school. So the public schools are getting these students back with less money to serve them than in the past. So privatization, to your question, may not be the panacea, may not be the solution. I'm a big public school fan, and I'd like to see us work to improve public schools. To that point, this is a not particularly specific to answer to your question, but I want to mention that there was a Supreme Court case a couple of terms ago, and it was one of those rare unanimous decisions from the Supreme Court, and it was the Andrew case. And the Andrew case, basically the bottom line finding in the case was that students with disabilities were not receiving the educational benefit to which they're entitled under IDEA. And what worries me is that I really haven't seen any significant changes to the public system to reflect what are we going to do to see that students with disabilities get the educational benefit that they're entitled to receive. So a lot of parents feel that their kids might get a better education in a private school, but the data are not available to really support that hypothesis. And so I have not seen data which will convince me that privatization is the answer to improving education. I would hope that we can continue to work hard to make the public system better, because we pay our taxes to support the public system, and it always bothers me that then parents have to pay extra money to send their kid to a private or a parochial school. Certainly, they're entitled to do that if that's their decision. By the way, we've also seen a significant increase in homeschooling as a result of the pandemic. And so it's going to be interesting to see the data on how kids who are homeschooled will perform if they are, in fact, able to take the state accountability measures.
And, it seems that we're so divided right now. When you were with the Department of Ed, there were a few pretty large things that got passed that were pretty helpful. And it must have been much more congenial setting in Washington at that point.
There was actual bipartisan work and bicameral work when President Bush wanted to be the education president. He was. It's the first bill that was introduced and passed and signed was No Child Left Behind, was that reauthorization of the Elementary and Secondary Education Act of 1965. And then there was Reading First, which was the largest investment in early reading in the history of the United States. And those programs and those pieces of legislation had their own problems that have been well documented and well reported. I don't have to belabor our podcast listeners with that history, but we saw that Republicans and Democrats were able to work together because they all cared about education. And sadly, we've lost some of the champions that we had. Senator Kennedy, may he rest in peace, used to tell me that disability was not inability, and he really cared about making things better for all of our kids. With his passing, and then John Boehner's gone, and George Miller. So some of the folks who really were instrumental to your question about the work that was done on behalf of the administration to get No Child Left Behind passed and Reading First passed and implemented and executed across the country. You don't see that nowadays. And I'm very worried, as a lot of people are, about what's about to happen next year. I will, to your question, mention that Senator Cassidy from Louisiana, yes, he is a Republican. He is very interested and has been talking a lot about the fact that he would like to see dyslexia added as a separate category under IDEA. There are a lot of us who worry about that because we think that the 13 categories of eligibility under IDEA are sufficient, and that dyslexia, as you know, is one of the terms that's used to describe the population of students with specific learning disabilities, who are the largest subgroup of kids receiving special education across the country. So is there really a need to create another category? Some of us believe not, but that's the kind of thing that is going to take up a lot of oxygen as the help committee gets together, reconstituted as it may be. And then we have change in the House, and so. But yeah, to your, I guess the basic answer to your question is the antagonism that exists between the two parties is something that we did not see in the Bush administration, and times have really changed, sadly. And I think that kind of antagonism and animosity is not helpful, because education, as you well know, Dave, is not a Republican or a Democratic issue. It's an American issue and affects everyone. And so we all ought to work together to make things better for all of our kids.
Let's change tack just a little bit, if I may. What research are you looking at closely in 2023?
So I think that one of the issues affecting students with disabilities is the question about how long should an intervention be used before a decision is made that the student is not responding to that intervention and that you want to try something different. The research that has not really been done sufficiently to answer that question. And a lot of educators want to know that, want that sort of guidance. So that's one area. I think that the neuroimaging technology continues to improve, and I think we have learned so much through things like fMRI, the functional magnetic resonance imagery data, to understand how the brain works, the reading brain works, why some kids struggle, how to go ahead and help those students who struggle, and what changes, this term of neuroplasticity, and being able to see the changes in the brain as a result of students getting the effective instruction that they should be getting. I think that is an area. I think that this question about what can we do to make sure that the reading programs that are being implemented across the country are based on good science. And I think that the translational research, being able to, I think there's a lot of research that's been done. And I think the question for a lot, teachers are not researchers. They need folks to be able to translate those research pieces, those data into things that are usable for teachers. That's an area I think that we'd like to see happen more. An area that is sort of important to me, and I don't know about many of your listeners, but we see there are some data to suggest that 75% of adults with Down syndrome, develop Alzheimer's. I think when I was working for the president, I was trying to get folks at the National Institutes of Health to be able to take a look at, can we learn more about Alzheimer's as a result of studying why so many individuals with Down syndrome develop Alzheimer's. That's an area, anyway, that I know that's not of interest to many of the folks who may be listening, but it is certainly an area of interest to me, given my brother, may he rest in peace, who had Down syndrome, and my stepson, who's 36 and has Down syndrome. So there's that. I think more research on things like childhood cancer, the different kinds of cancers. I think also, given the pandemic, certainly more research on how this thing got started, what we're going to do to be able to prevent people from getting ill. There are lots of different areas outside of education where research, I think, can impact education. So those are just some of the areas. And I think that
so we can put you down as pro-science?
Yeah, you can definitely put me down as pro-science, yes.
Good. Well, I know that this coming year you have you're hosting an event on tutoring, which of course is interesting to us. What is that about?
So I think we're concerned about the opportunity to provide high-dose tutoring to kids. One of the things that you all have done so well at Lindamood-Bell is you've understood this dose-response interaction, and you understand that intensity of instruction, the actual amount of time on task, the actual amount of time that students spend with an adult teaching them is critically important. This 4 hours a day, 5 days a week model that Lindamood-Bell has implemented for years is so critically important and does not happen in public schools. This whole notion of 20 minutes a day or taking kids out of the core instruction and sending them to special ed when they get the reading instruction from a teacher who's had less training on how to teach reading than their general ed teacher. All of those kinds of things have contributed to the stagnation in academic achievement and the fact that special ed is not special for the vast majority of students who receive special ed. So we know that there's a great deal of money available for tutoring. And so the question then is, okay, how should that tutoring be delivered? Who should be doing the tutoring? What kind of training should those individuals have? What kind of support should they have to make sure that, in fact, that the tutoring that they're delivering is effective? Progress monitoring, so collecting data on a regular basis to make sure that, in fact, that students are acquiring the skills that we're trying to teach them in tutoring. And tutoring is sort of different from the way we used to think of tutoring, is that when I was in 8th grade and having a horrible time with geometry and 9th grade in algebra because the kid I cheated off in geometry moved, we had access to tutors. And now, as we're talking about tutoring, it's much different. And so this concept of high-dose tutoring is one that we'd like to explore and be able to train people on how to go ahead and implement and execute that in their school districts. I think it's so important to make learning fun, and we have forgotten that this drill and kill, which permeates our approach to too many kids who are struggling. I think that what I'm really worried about, Dave, to get back among the many things I worry about as we look at next year, the pandemic, to go back to your first question about kids who experience learning loss. This notion that, the kid is struggling, let's go ahead and evaluate that student and then put that student in special education. That's not going to fix the problem. That's not to me, that's not the solution. We really have to do a better job of differentiating kids with real disabilities from kids who are struggling, who do not have disabilities. They just haven't been taught. The ain't been taught kids. So I think that is an issue that I hope as we move into 2023, we can really be very careful about not inundating the system with inappropriate referrals and inappropriate placement of students in special education. And I think that I also know that there is to use the term unprecedented, there's an unprecedented amount of money available through the rescue plan and the ESSER portion of the rescue plan, and that money's got to get spent. And 2023 is a year where a lot of school districts will be trying to spend that money. And my real hope is that they spend it on things that work, on programs that are effective, and that we really do try to instill this lifelong love of learning in our kids. And with that, wish everyone very happy holidays and a great 2023.
Thank you so much, Dr. Pasternack, for your insight. I really appreciate it.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you for the questions, Dave, and the opportunity to talk with you.
Take care.
And thank you for listening. Learn more about us at lindamood-bell.com. You can also find us on YouTube, Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. We are Lindamood-Bell.